There was no shortage of quality first-person shooters released in the 90s. Some of these were grounded in historical conflicts, some in fantasy, and some in between. But of all the shooters released in the 90s, there was only one based on the Wild West, 1997's Outlaws, a game that managed to both stumble in some areas while being revolutionary in others. Welcome, my name's AZDash and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. LucasArts were on a pretty hot streak in the 90s. Not only did they have their space combat simulators, but they also had their hit shooter Dark Forces. What made Dark Forces so good was that it wasn't just another Doom clone with a Star Wars skin, but a game that took a lot of what made contemporary shooters good, added its fair share of new systems and mechanics, and wrapped it all up in a great Star Wars story. Now, one of the reasons it wasn't labelled as a Doom clone was that it didn't actually use the Doom engine, rather an in-house engine developed by LucasArts, aptly named the Jedi engine. While the Doom engine was far more friendly to modders, the Jedi engine was far more technically advanced, supporting the ability to look up and down, as well as jump, crouch and swim, all things which contributed to allowing for far more intricate levels. With more intricate levels came more intricate objectives. It was no longer just a case of get from point A to point B, but rather to accomplish a set of tasks between these points, sometimes in a particular order. After releasing to positive reception, it was probably not a surprise that several years later, the LucasArts team would return with another shooter based on the Jedi engine called Outlaws, a mostly linear shooter set in the Wild West. My first experience with Outlaws was a demo, which was basically the second level of the main game. I remember having fun with the demo, but never actually being able to complete it. More on this later. With many other games releasing around this same period, the game passed me by until it recently came up on a recommendation list on a popular digital storefront. With curiosity getting the better of me, I decided to pick it up and set out to see if it's some type of hidden gem or just another shooter. The answer is complex, but I'm going to do my best to explain it. Firstly, I need to talk about the actual copy of the game I purchased from GOG. First, the good news. Not only do you get the original single-player game, but you get the expansion known as A Handful of Missions, which released a year after the original game. These missions all tell somewhat self-contained stories and graphically look the best of any missions in the entire game. I don't know if these were developed as an incentive for other developers to perhaps license the Jedi engine, or just leftover concepts from the main game, but graphically, these are all of a much higher quality than those found in the main game. Now for the bad news. I don't expect games to run perfectly on modern hardware. However, Outlaws has some considerable challenges in its digital storefront form, which may or may not impact people in the same way or even at all. However, in my case, I suffered from a variety of issues, with the most impactful being no music throughout the entire game. And it's actually funny how I realized the music was missing. After playing through the first few levels, I was reading up on the game's history and noticed that it had won an award for its soundtrack. After realizing that I couldn't even remember the soundtrack, I went back to the game and realized I couldn't remember it because it wasn't there. I tried a variety of fixes, but ultimately I never could get music to play during gameplay, which is disappointing because I have since listened to it and it's really good stuff. The other issue I encountered was a hard crash when passing through a very particular area of the fourth level. No matter what I tried, the game always crashed when I approached a particular waterfall. A quick Google search suggested that it might be an issue with the default graphics mode in how it tries to render the waterfall. After a quick change from direct 3D to glide, I was able to continue on my way without any crashes. I wouldn't say these issues are dire, however they are certainly far from ideal, and I would strongly suggest using era-appropriate hardware to play the game, if possible. In terms of the story, you're not exactly getting a Hollywood blockbuster here, or anything that comes close to the more modern Western stories told in games like Red Dead Redemption, but you are getting a serviceable story which helps to provide a purpose to move through the game's various locations. The plot follows retired US Marshal James Anderson's quiet farm life, until one day, after heading into the town to pick up some supplies, he returns home to find his wife murdered, daughter missing, and house on fire. What follows is essentially an 8 to 12 hour massacre of the Wild West as James seeks answers and to find those responsible. Despite the plot being fairly basic, its presentation in the form of cutscenes, which while digital have the graphical style of hand animation, combined with a rock-solid cast of voice actors, really helped to bring some weight to the overall delivery of the narrative.
My father didn't live long enough to find out what he could have been.
Well, I reckon that's true, but...
And every man's entitled to a fair trial, wouldn't you say?
Right, but you never shot an innocent man.
I never met an innocent man.
Oh, and there's also a separate set of missions outside of the main campaign called historical missions, and these basically follow James rising to the rank of Marshal by apprehending a variety of criminals throughout the Wild West. I do think that there could have been some tweaks to the story that, while small, would have given a little more payoff to the game's conclusion. I mean, the whole reason for James's family being targeted is covered off in about 6 seconds of a cutscene, and makes the whole basis for the game's story feel paper thin. Likewise, the historical missions, while being novel, really should have been integrated into the main campaign to aid in telling a more cohesive story. As I said though, while the plot is somewhat weak and disjointed, it does just enough to provide the player with enough emotional investment to seek out its conclusion. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's grab our revolver, shoot some bad guys, and head back to 1997 to remember Outlaws. While Outlaws is based on the Jedi engine, it certainly doesn't feel like a Star Wars game, in part because everything from the menus to the HUD are carefully curated to a Wild West theme, with everything from loaded ammunition to health appearing as playing cards in the bottom half of the screen. It's certainly a unique HUD and something which supports the rest of the game's mechanics well, with the player very quickly being able to tell exactly how many rounds are in their weapon and the current state of their health. Camera and control have seen substantial advances from what the Jedi engine previously delivered. Firstly, there is now mouse look, which enables you to look up and down, something which, while basic by modern standards, wasn't overly common in earlier shooters. This allows for much greater creativity in level design, with the ability to not only include much more varied terrain elevation, but allow for far more precise control in longer range gunplay. Along with the greater verticality in terrain, there is a lot more focus put on crouching, with it being practically required in some firefights to avoid taking damage while reloading. Another advancement is the introduction of a stamina system, which drains when the player does things like jump or run, which is generally fairly forgiving, with me never encountering a time in the game when stamina was a limiting factor. Most of the other staples of control present in the Jedi engine also make a return, such as swimming and different surfaces having different movement characteristics, such as ice being slippery and carrying inertia. While there isn't a huge amount of platforming, when it does crop up, it's rarely an issue, thanks to the relatively precise and predictable control. Overall, the camera and control certainly support the gameplay and level design well, with there being many sections of the game that just would not have been possible using older camera and control approaches. Gunplay is very solid for a shooter of this era, and combined with control leads to a fairly satisfying combat experience. Outlaws is also a shooter which has vastly different utility for each weapon, requiring the player to switch weapons often depending on the combat encounter. In terms of the weapons, you start out with a pistol that will be your go-to weapon early on for both close and medium range encounters. It includes both the single fire option and a rapid fire one, which quickly empties every loaded bullet into your target by holding down the secondary fire button. The rapid fire is really useful against some of the game's more powerful enemies, as it can take them down before they have a chance to get off any shots at you. Next up is the rifle, which is good for medium to long range combat, the latter being greatly improved by the addition of a sniper scope, which can be found fairly early on in the adventure. And as far as I know, this was actually the first implementation of a scope with a zoom in a PC first-person shooter. It's not the best implementation, with moving targets occasionally being difficult to track, but for the time it was impressive and certainly helped inspire future games to use this mechanic. For the closer range combat encounters, the game features a whopping 3 different types of shotguns, each with a slightly different purpose. First up is the standard single barrel, which has a fairly tight spread and is useful at both short and medium ranges. Next is the double barrel shotgun, which features a slightly larger spread at the cost of distance. Lastly is the sword-off shotgun, which is only useful at very short range, but features a very wide spread, allowing you to easily take out multiple enemies with only one shot. There's also a few melee options, including both fists and knives, and while they are both extremely effective up close, barring one mission, they are not very practical, as you will face a hail of bullets from enemies trying to get close enough to use them. Oh, and there is a kind of special weapon, the Gatling gun, which is a weapon you deploy and can then shoot from a fixed spot. And while it sounds really cool, in practice, given how spread out enemies are throughout the missions, it's not overly useful bar 1 or 2 situations. One of the other unique things about gunplay is the reload system. Now, in the 90s, some games included the concept of reloading, while others didn't. However, Outlaws makes reloading a much more impactful game mechanic, owing to the fact that most weapons have relatively low amounts of ammo that can be loaded into a weapon, and this action takes time depending on how many bullets you load in. Sometimes you might run out of ammo in the middle of a firefight and need to quickly reload just a few bullets to clear the area. Reloading is accomplished by clicking the right mouse button, and this feels really intuitive as opposed to some type of key binding. Now, one of the things that will be quite polarizing in the game is the difficulty level, of which there are 3, good, bad, and ugly. In terms of combat alone, good is fairly easy outside of some boss encounters, bad is extremely challenging, and ugly is almost impossible, at least for me. The biggest challenge with the bad and ugly difficulties is that your entire health pool can be wiped off in seconds, particularly in close encounters, which is not helped by some fairly cheap enemy placements. Honestly, there's a boss that can wipe off your health pool in less than 2 seconds, which I'm pretty sure is actually faster than you can defeat them with the same sustained fire. But even with this crushing level of difficulty, combat isn't my main issue with the difficulty, rather the challenge of working out what to do next. Unlike Dark Forces, there is no objective system in the game, meaning that you need to work out what to do to progress without any clear indication of what it might be. Take for example the second level, which was actually the level the demo featured. There's a building which you can't get into without a key. Now, I knew from the previous level that when you found a door you couldn't open without a key, you needed to search around and find that key. So that's what I did, for a long time. After almost being convinced that the game had bugged out, I checked my inventory and found that I had collected a shovel. Now, my first thought was maybe I used the shovel to break down the door, but no, that didn't work. After another marathon of searching for clues on how to progress, I found an area of the ground which looked different to the others. With my shovel equipped, I was able to use it to dig my way into the locked building. Now, I don't inherently have a problem with challenging puzzles. However, in the case of Outlaws, once you remove the gunplay and make it just about solving a puzzle, it's not a very entertaining or interesting world to actually solve a puzzle in. A big part of what makes the game seem uninteresting outside of combat is the graphical presentation. While the Jedi engine did a great job of bringing the Star Wars universe to life in 1995, its ability to render the Wild West is questionable to say the least. I think that one of the things which worked well for Dark Forces was a lot of futuristic minimalist designs in the levels, which mimicked the areas of the movies. However, with a much more outdoor setting of the Wild West, the gaps in the Jedi engine's texture quality and rendering become very apparent. I mean, take a look at the first levels of Quake and Duke Nukem 3D, released a year earlier, and compare them to what's on offer with Outlaws. It's a night and day difference in the presentation, and what's worse is that Outlaws actually had a slightly higher set of system requirements, which I suspect was more for the cutscenes as opposed to the actual gameplay. Even comparing Outlaws to Doom paints a telling picture, with the challenges in the Jedi engine's ability to deliver a convincing outdoor setting on full display. Now, to be fair, there are some levels, mostly the smaller ones, which do look better, as these are no doubt playing to the Jedi engine's strengths as opposed to its weaknesses. However, when viewed as a whole, the graphical presentation is easily the game's weakest link. LucasArts are generally wizards when it comes to sound, and Outlaws is no exception. While I wasn't able to personally experience the music, it was clearly good enough to win an award, and after listening to it offline after my playthrough, I can attest to it being of a high quality.
No!
Outside of the music, the other audio like sound effects and voices are all great. All of the weapons have very satisfying sounds, and combined with the taunts of your enemies, give you a good reason to keep the bullets flying. Outlaws is an interesting case of a lot of effort being put into a game, but not necessarily in the right areas. Yes, the gunplay is solid, which makes up a large part of the adventure. However, the graphical presentation is just not at a standard that gamers were expecting for a game released in 1997. It's certainly not an art direction issue, as the cutscenes and menus all look great, but rather an issue of pushing the Jedi engine to render a set of environments that it probably was never designed for. There is certainly a case to be made for a remake of Outlaws, as with some improved graphics and some tweaks to other areas of the game, I certainly think modern audiences could enjoy it. In its current form though, it's certainly quite rough around the edges. As the game wasn't a huge financial success, we never got a follow-up or indeed any other game using the Jedi engine, as it was replaced by the Sith engine for Dark Forces 2, releasing later in 1997. And this is where I'm confused, because objectively the Sith engine was a huge improvement in graphics over the Jedi engine, using fully 3D polygonal models and environments, and released only 6 months later. I feel like Outlaws would be a much better game if it had used this engine. Alas, it didn't, and its lack of financial success is likely an outcome of this. Outlaws is not a terrible game, it's actually quite a good game, held back by some decisions which grated in the 90s and have aged poorly by modern standards. If you have an interest in the Wild West, or are just looking for something to tie you over until the next Red Dead entry, then Outlaws could be for you. For those looking for more non-stop action or a visual showcase, in its current form, it's certainly a difficult recommendation. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.